Hey guys. Tonight we march back in time, not to castles and courtly love, but to the muddy, stinking, utterly confusing mess of a real medieval battlefield. You're not a noble knight in polished plate armor with a heroic theme song. Nope. You're a regular foot soldier, maybe even conscripted. And the only thing shinier than your helmet is the puddle of someone else's fear you just stepped in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing who's drifting off with me from across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night is heavy. The air thick with the stink of wet wool, horses, and whatever's cooking over that low fire, a few paces off, probably some poor attempt at barley stew. You lie curled under your damp cloak, one arm tucked under your head for warmth, the other still clutching your belt knife, like that'll do anything against a sword tomorrow. Grass presses cold and slick against your back. Every time you almost fall asleep, someone nearby coughs, farts, or shifts and knocks into you with a steel elbow. Cozy. Your stomach's still twisting from dinner, if you can even call it that. The bread was mostly crust. The cheese had ambitions of becoming a sentient being. You're not sure what meat was in that broth. Someone said rabbit. Someone else said, don't ask. But hey, you've eaten worse. Once, back in the village, there was that mystery stew that made 3 people see angels and 1 person bark for a week. The darkness doesn't help. There's no camp lanterns glowing gently like in the movies. Just the occasional flicker of a distant torch, casting long shadows of tents and figures hunched over gear. You hear whispered prayers, soft weeping, and the low hum of men trying to hum themselves to sleep. One guy is full-on snoring, loudly. You silently consider stuffing your sock in his mouth, but it's your only dry one. You shift again. The ground is lumpy. Your gambeson makes you sweat where it shouldn't. And no matter how you lie, your scabbard is jabbing you in the ribs. Still, you try to calm your breath. Big inhale. Hold it. Exhale. Repeat. But all you can think about is tomorrow, because tomorrow, you're going into battle. Real battle. Not training. Not tavern boasting. Not chasing a goose with a stick and calling it combat practice. Actual, muddy, loud, terrifying medieval warfare. Historians still argue whether most medieval battles were carefully planned encounters or glorious, chaotic accidents with flags. Honestly, from where you're lying, it feels like the second option. Nobody seems to know what's happening. You overheard your sergeant ask another sergeant, what time things start? And both just nodded like that, settled it. Classic. You pull your cloak tighter. The wind is picking up, and someone's armor clinks softly as they shift nearby. You recognize the rhythm. It's old Tom. He always scratches before he sleeps. Weird comfort. You try to distract yourself by thinking about home. The little field behind the cottage. The cracked mug you always drink from. That chicken that hates everyone but you. Remember her, named Beatrice. Bit your uncle once. Good times, but then a trumpet sounds. Long and low in the distance. Just a test call. Probably. Or maybe a reminder that dawn is coming. Either way, It slithers down your spine like ice. Your heart thuds. You shift again. Hands suddenly clammy. Tomorrow. It's real. And here's the thing. Nobody tells you there's no inspiring speech. No general on a horse shouting about glory and honor. There's just you, your chattering teeth, your stiff boots, and the smell of 400 other men pretending they're not scared. You glance up at the sky. Cloudy. No stars tonight. The moon is just a pale smudge behind layers of gloom. You try to imagine you're somewhere else. Somewhere safe. But the low rumble of shifting gear, the scent of smoke and sweat, keeps pulling you back. Still, eventually, sleep does come. Not all at once, more like a slow fog crawling over your brain. 1 minute you're staring at a smudge of moon. The next, your dreams are filled with drums and dogs and a pig in a helmet. Not helpful, but better than nothing. And so, under that heavy sky, curled beside other unlucky souls, you drift off to sleep. Tomorrow's chaos will come soon enough. Tonight, at least, you're still whole. You wake to the sound of drums low, steady, and entirely too confident. The kind of rhythm that says, "Get up. You poor fool. It's happening." Your eyes snap open. And for a moment, you hope it's still night. It isn't. The sky is a dull, iron gray. The kind that makes you wonder if the sun even remembers how to shine. The air smells sharper this morning. Still, the usual stew of mud, unwashed bodies, and campfire ash. But now it carries a thread of tension. Everyone's moving. Slowly. Gradually. But definitely moving. Boots thump. Belts jingle. Somewhere, someone's already arguing about who stole their soup pot. You sit up and rub your eyes. Your back cracks like old wood. Your mouth tastes like wool and regret. You fumble for your cloak, which during the night decided to become a sponge. Lovely. The ground beneath you is soggy from a pre-dawn drizzle. Your legs feel like tree trunks. Your arms even worse. You ache in places you didn't know could ache. Is that your shin or someone else's? Too early to tell. Your neighbor, possibly Tom, again grunts a greeting and offers you half a hard biscuit. It's got the consistency of flint and the flavor of depression. But you nod gratefully and take a bite. You immediately regret it. The biscuit fights back. Breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of a ladleful of lukewarm broth and whatever crumbs you manage to scavenge. You slurp it down, pretending not to notice the floating bit of something. You don't ask. Asking is for people with options. You gather your gear helmet, sword, belt, and the padded gambeson that smells like 3 centuries of sweat. Sliding into it feels like hugging a damp mattress. Then comes the mail. You hoist it over your head and nearly dislocate a shoulder. It settles around your torso with a clank, tugging you toward the ground like gravity's angrier cousin. Historians still argue whether the average soldier really wore full mail every day, or if most just strapped on whatever wouldn't fall apart mid-charge. Based on the state of your gear, you're voting for bare minimum with creative lacing. Next, you lace up your boots, which have dried into shapes vaguely resembling hooves. You stomp around a bit until your toes agree to cooperate. Sort of. Your feet already hurt. It's going to be a long day. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval armies handed out battle charms, tiny wooden carvings, scraps of holy cloth, or even small bones meant to protect the wearer. You've got one in your pouch, a chicken's foot tied with string. You found it behind the latrines. You're not entirely sure it's a charm, but it hasn't cursed you yet. So you keep it. The sergeant stomps past, yelling about, forming up in 10 minutes. He doesn't check if anyone's listening. He just shouts, then shouts again for good measure. The men shuffle toward the main road, clutching spears, axes, swords, whatever they were issued or could borrow. A few hold tools that look suspiciously like farming implements with pointy attachments. Innovation. You fall into line somewhere in the middle. Behind you, someone sneezes. In front of you, a man keeps muttering something about goats and destiny. You stare straight ahead and pretend not to exist. The drumbeat grows louder, faster. It's not music. It's instruction. 1 beat. March. 2 beats. Halt. 3 beats. Get your life together and move before someone notices you, hesitating. There's no speech from the commander. Just a tired-looking knight riding past, glancing down like he's mentally separating the maybes from the definitely doomed. He says something like, "Hold fast," which is either meant to inspire or simply fill the awkward silence. The banner ahead flaps lazily. Red. Black. A little muddy. You can't tell if it's your side's crest or a spilled wine stain with ambition. You march. And as you walk, every step squelching slightly, you realize your mouth is dry. Your palms sweat. Your helmet presses against your ears, just enough to make your own breath sound like a nervous horse. Every few paces, someone coughs. Someone else farts. It's all very majestic, but beneath the noise and nerves, there's something else, creeping in something quiet. Not fear. Not yet. More like anticipation's weirder cousin. That restless feeling of knowing something big is about to happen, and not being able to do a thing about it. You keep walking, past tree stumps, over flattened grass, toward a horizon that seems less and less theoretical. You know the enemy is somewhere out there, also in armor, also uncomfortable, also probably wondering if it's too late to fake a twisted ankle and go home. You grip your sword tighter and wait for the signal. You don't so much stand at attention as you do awkwardly loiter in formation while regretting breakfast. Your feet are numb. Your legs itch beneath the layers. And your helmet, now firmly wedged onto your skull, has turned your peripheral vision into tunnel vision. You look like a medieval turtle with trust issues. Around you, the army arranges itself into something approximating order. Shields form walls. Spears angle upward like a field of angry reeds. Squires run about tightening straps, delivering water, and fielding nervous questions like, "Are we supposed to die before lunch? Or after?" Your job now is to wait. That's the grand secret of medieval warfare. It's 10% chaos and 90% extremely tense standing. You shift your weight from foot to foot, hoping nobody notices you haven't fully figured out how to hold your sword without looking like you're about to sell it for turnips. To your left, a man adjusts the padding under his hauberk and mutters something about chafing. To your right, another fellow is whispering a prayer so fast It sounds like bees arguing in Latin. You nod once in solemn agreement, though you're mostly just thinking about how badly you need to pee. Then comes the armor parade. Not yours. Obviously, you're wearing something that looks like it was dragged through 3 hedge mazes and a fire. But the knights ride past, gleaming and majestic, their horses stomping the ground, like they've been personally offended by mud. The lead knight raises a gauntlet and gives a small wave, the kind of gesture that says, "You will be doing all the dying." And I appreciate that. Historians still argue whether these pre-battle displays were about morale, intimidation, or simply ego. You're leaning heavily toward ego. Sir Fancy Helmet over there probably hasn't had mud on him since he was born. And yet here you are, part human, part swamp. Then comes the trumpet blast. One long, quivering note, the kind of sound that makes your spine do a quick inventory of its regrets. You're moving now. Slowly. 1 foot. Then the other. The front ranks advance. Your row steps forward. Shields up. Spears ready. Someone behind you drops a helmet and swears so colorfully you're impressed. It's still PG. This is it. You're marching toward the enemy. You can see them now, just shapes at first. Then forms. Shields. Banners. Movement. They look just as nervous as you, which is oddly comforting. Nobody here is having a good time. Your heartbeat thumps in your ears, matching the drums behind you. Your mouth goes dry. Your fingers twitch. You wonder if your chicken foot charm is actually cursed. You try to do some brave breathing, but your helmet makes it sound like Darth Vader is hyperventilating. You keep marching. Quirky tidbit. Some soldiers tied colorful ribbons around their weapons to tell them apart after the battle. Others carved their initials into the pommel. You've marked yours with a notch and a smudge of berry juice. Probably not long-lasting. But hey, it's something. The distance closes. You can hear their drums now, too. They're shouting. A few war cries tossed out like badly rehearsed theater lines. Someone on your side yells back. And for a moment, it's like a weird crossfield argument. Then everything goes quiet. No drums. No marching. Just wind. Just the creak of leather. Just that little voice in your head saying, "Well, here we go." A second trumpet blast. Shorter. Sharper. The men ahead of you begin to run. Not a sprint, more of a committed jog with existential dread. You follow, trying not to trip over your own scabbard. Your knees hate you. Your sword feels heavier with every step. Your mail rattles like a coin purse during an earthquake. The enemy line grows clearer. Faces. Raised shields. Pointed sticks. You squint, trying to find someone who looks particularly squishable. But everyone looks terrifying. And then someone to your left yells, "Shield up." You yank your shield upward just in time for the sky to go dark. It's not a solar eclipse, it's arrows. Thousands of them. They hiss through the air like angry wasps with metal stingers. You duck instinctively. But you can't help peeking. A few hit the ground. A few thunk into shields. One guy takes a hit to the foot and screams something extremely undignified. A knight rides past him like nothing happened. Historians still argue whether archers were more effective in the first volley or the second. You're too busy trying not to become a pincushion to vote. You don't know it yet. But that volley was the opener. A warning shot. A kind of welcome to the battle. Try not to die announcement, because now comes the real fun. The horn blasts again. You brace. And charge. You run. If it can even be called that, it's more of a lurching stomp. Each foot dragging through mud that clings like tax collectors. Your shield jostles with every step, and your sword arm already aches from just holding the thing like a glorified tent pole. The enemy gets closer. Way too close. They stop looking like an idea and start looking like individuals sweaty. Wide-eyed individuals who are just as horrified as you are, and then impact. It's not graceful, not cinematic. There's no poetic ballet of blades. It's more like someone dropped 50 sacks of potatoes into 50 other sacks of potatoes, and then gave each one a stick. You slam into the front line with a noise that's part metal crash, part human grunt, and part something that might be a burp. Your shield bashes into another shield. Your sword arm wobbles. Your helmet rings with the echo of someone else's scream. Welcome to the front line. There's no room to swing your weapon properly. You jab. More like poking than slashing. Hoping to make contact with something that isn't your own foot. You get shoved. You shove back. Someone elbows you in the ribs. And you instinctively respond with a clumsy bash of your shield. It feels like trying to play rugby with kitchen utensils. You lose sight of everything beyond the man directly in front of you. He's got a chipped helmet, a crooked nose, and eyes that scream, "I didn't sign up for this either." You raise your blade. He raises his. Both of you hesitate just long enough for someone from the side to knock into you both and break the tension. Historians still argue whether most battlefield deaths came from direct combat or the chaos of the crush trampling, smothering, falling and not getting up. Based on the current situation, you vote firmly for whatever this nonsense is. A horn blows again. Or maybe it's just someone yelling. Hard to tell. You're focused on keeping your feet, keeping your shield up, and not swallowing the blood you're 40% sure isn't yours. The man next to you screams a name, maybe his brother's, maybe a prayer, and vanishes into the press. The noise is constant, clanking metal, shouting men, hooves pounding somewhere nearby. You can't see the cavalry, but you can feel them in your rib cage. Every gallop shakes the ground like thunder with an attitude problem. You duck. You swing. You get pushed back a few feet and nearly fall. The guy behind you grabs your shoulder and yells, "Forward," with such force that it gives your spine a motivational slap. And so you go forward. Quirky tidbit. Some soldiers stuffed straw or moss into their helmets to cushion the inevitable head thwacks. You've got old wool in yours. It itches like betrayal, but seems to help. Maybe. A sword glances off your shield. You retaliate with a wild swing that makes contact with someone's elbow. He screams. You panic. Did you win? Are you in trouble? There are no rules. It's all just muscle and panic. Then someone else collides with your side, and you nearly go down. But your foot catches on a rock miraculously, and you stay upright. If only by the grace of medieval physics. Your breathing is ragged now. The inside of your helmet is humid enough to grow mushrooms. Every breath tastes like hot iron and wool. You're sweating so much, it feels like your armor is melting. And still, the fight drags on. You yab again. You push. The enemy line gives a little maybe. Or maybe you just imagined it in a desperate act of optimism. Either way, you shout. Because shouting feels like control. Someone near you drops their weapon and falls to their knees. You don't know whose side he's on. You don't stop to ask. You just keep moving. Keep pushing. Keep swinging. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers truly experienced battle rage or if it was more about fear-fueled survival flailing. At this point, you suspect it's both. You're not angry. You're just very motivated to not be stabbed. Eventually, there's a pause. A gasp in the storm. You and the people around you hesitate. Shields raised. Swords at the ready, but nobody's pushing forward. The line stalls. Bosigebunt. Somewhere. Someone is groaning. Somewhere else. There's a laugh short. Wild. Slightly unhinged. The man in front of you stares. You stare back. Neither of you moves. Then, without warning, he steps back. Retreat find or, just good manners. Too late to ask. The wave pulls you forward. You surge again. You stumble forward. Caught in the collective lurch of exhausted bodies and clanging iron. There's no elegant momentum, just a staggering wave of limbs and armor held together by sheer, sweaty determination. You don't so much charge as you get dragged by the rhythm of the horde, like a leaf in a very aggressive stream. The front line, such as it is, bulges and twists. You're not entirely sure if your side is winning, losing, or just participating enthusiastically. You briefly consider asking, but the man next to you has blood on his teeth and a wild grin that says, "Don't ask me anything. Ever." Mud sucks at your boots like a clingy ghost. You try to lift one foot, only for the other to betray you. Somehow, you stay upright, though it takes a wild swing of your shield and a muttered apology to your ankles. Then, something shifts. The enemy line wobbles just a fraction, but enough for a general roar to go up from your side. Is it confidence? Confusion war cries, and was that a sneeze blend into a guttural din? Regardless, your sergeant shouts, "Press them," and starts waving his sword like he's conducting an orchestra with rage issues. You surge forward with the others. It's not bravery. It's physics. You duck beneath a spear that whistles past your ear. You jab. Strike. Bash with your shield. You're not fighting individuals anymore. You're reacting to movement. It's like dancing. If dancing involved a high risk of tooth loss, quirky tidbit. It wasn't uncommon for soldiers to stuff bits of wax in their ears before battle, not for noise protection, but to stop panic-inducing sounds from breaking their focus. You haven't done that. You're hearing everything. Thank you very much, including the guy yelling, "Mother, 4 rows over," and the distant but insistent sound of retreat horns. Or possibly indigestion. Suddenly, your foot lands on something squishy and you nearly topple. You look down. A torn satchel. Bread spilling out. Weirdly comforting. You grab a crust piece and shove it into your pouch war or not. Snacks are important. Then, a pause. The line slows again. This time, it's confusion more than exhaustion. You glance around. Panting. Opposing soldiers are stepping back, not fleeing exactly, but clearly unsure. Your group hesitates. Your sword wobbles in your grip like a sad tuning fork. A horn sounds behind you. Not the run screaming horn, more like adjust your belt and try again horn. You straighten a little. Your arm feels like it's been marinated in lead. You blink sweat out of your eyes. Forward, someone yells. Where someone else mutters, but forward you go. Again. Historians still argue whether medieval battles had clear structure or devolved into chaotic mosh pits with sharp accessories. Judging by the current state of affairs, you're planting your flag firmly in the mosh pit camp. You end up next to a different soldier, shorter, older, wheezing. He nods once, then swings his axe so wildly, you instinctively duck. He's not aiming at you. Thankfully, probably, you vow to keep a bit of distance. For your own health. Suddenly, you see a flag fall. It's a small thing, but the effect ripples. The enemy nearest it stutter steps. One drops their weapon. One turns and bolts, like he just remembered he left the fire on. The cry goes up. They're breaking. Are they maybe? Possibly. Or maybe it's a trick. You're not paid to think. Just to run. So you, though, over churned earth, over flattened grass, past groaning bodies and shattered shields. You run. Ahead. The enemy flees, some stumbling, some sprinting. They drop weapons, drop helmets. One even drops his pants. That's a choice. You join the chase, not out of malice, more out of inertia. If you stop, someone will trample you. If you keep moving, there's hope. You call out a war cry, which comes out as more of a wheeze, but points for effort. Then, silence. Not total, but sudden enough to make you blink. The immediate fight has moved. You're standing on ground you didn't expect to survive long enough to see. Around you bodies. Some moving. Some not. Some groaning things you really hope are insults and not final words. The smell is medieval. Blood. Sweat. Mud. And something unidentifiably eggy. You take a step. Then another. Your legs shake. Your arms twitch. Your sword, slick and sticky, hangs limply in your grasp. You're alive. Somehow, quirky footnote. One 14th century chronicler claimed that soldiers would occasionally stop mid-battle to loot fallen bodies, even from their own side. You eye a nearby pouch, but decide against it. You're too tired to be morally flexible. A trumpet sounds again, this time more melodic. The kind of note that says pause. Regroup. Try to look triumphant. You head back toward the main line. Shoulders sagging. Helmet inte. Dignity optional. The battle isn't over. But this part is, you don't walk so much as you limp in the general direction of where the yelling sounds less stabby. The battlefield behind you is a mess, scattered weapons, dented helmets, and more mud than you thought the earth could contain. You stop to lean against a broken spear stuck upright in the muck, breathing like you've just climbed a mountain made entirely of your own regrets. Around you, others drift back too. Some are grinning bloody, exhausted, dazed grins that say, "Still here." Others wear that blank stare you only get when your brain hasn't caught up with your body. A few argue over who struck whom first. But nobody has the energy to care deeply. Everyone smells like they've been slow-cooked in fear and old cheese. You finally drop to the ground, your knees groaning louder than the man next to you who's trying to take off his mail with one arm. It's the kind of exhaustion that wraps around your bones. Your shield clunks beside you. You almost kiss the dirt in relief. Almost. The quiet now feels louder than the battle did. You can still hear the echo of screams. Metal on metal. Horses panicking. And the horrifying squeal of that one guy who got poked somewhere very personal. But now, it's muffled. Like someone pressed a pillow to the world. You flex your fingers. They don't respond well. You try to peel off your gloves, but can't tell whether it's dried blood, old broth, or the medieval version of glue holding them on. Possibly all three. Nearby, a soldier with a split lip holds up a dented flask and mutters, "To whatever just happened." You reach for your own flask. It tastes like warm regret and possibly boot leather. But you toast back anyway. Historians still argue whether most medieval battles lasted hours or just moments stretched by adrenaline. Yours felt like both. An eternity of noise, compressed into a breathless blur. Like sprinting through a nightmare you only half remember. You start taking stock. All limbs accounted for. Helmet still on. Sword, slightly bent, but still attached to your hand like it grew there. Your mail is ripped on the shoulder. But it's a stylish rip battle chick, if you will. The padded gambeson underneath is soaked through, and not with anything you'd want to describe. Quirky fact. Some soldiers kept little pins or needles sewn into their cuffs so they could stitch up small wounds or tears. On the go. You check your sleeves. No pins. But you do find a crumb of something vaguely bread-like. Score. A horse wanders past riderless. Of course. Its mane is tangled with bits of feather and string. Probably from someone's crest. It pauses. Stares at you. Snort dismissively. And walks away like you're not worth its hay. Fair enough. You watch as a few squires begin the gruesome task of collecting the wounded. It's oddly quiet work. No ceremony. Just grim faces. Rolled sleeves. And the occasional whispered word you can't make out. One squire trips over a helmet and curses so gently it sounds like a lullaby. You push yourself upright. Muscles scream. Blisters plead for retirement. But you're up. You limp toward the nearest cluster of survivors. Looking for familiar faces. You find one, or at least someone wearing the same colored sash as you. Close enough. You sit beside him. He nods. You nod. That's the full conversation. A knight wanders past. Armor scraped and dusty. He says something about regrouping. But no one moves. He doesn't press the issue. Just walks on like a ghost made of iron. The field looks different now. In the distance, the enemy line is gone. Maybe they retreated. Maybe they're circling back. You don't really care. Right now, the field is yours. It's not a victory. It's just a pause. You glance around. Flags are down. Banners drooping. Arrows stick out of the ground at odd angles, like a very angry garden. Someone's boot has been flung onto a bush. You wonder if they'll come back for it. A healer stops by to check your arm. She tuts, smears something that smells like fermented cabbage across your shoulder, and disappears before you can thank or question her. You blink slowly, trying not to fall asleep on a rock. Someone starts singing, off-key, but brave. The tune is vaguely familiar, something about victory or ale, or both. Others join in, weak voices becoming a wobbling chorus. You hum along, even if your mouth's too tired to shape the words. It's strange. You feel lighter now. Not because anything's easier, just because the part you feared most is over. The surviving bit. The not dying yet bit. It counts. Quirky superstition time. Some soldiers buried tiny clay figures before battle for luck. You dig your fingers into the dirt now, wondering if you disturbed one. If you did, you're not putting it back. A crow lands on a broken spear nearby and caws once. Judgmentally, you wave it off. It doesn't leave. Night's creeping in slowly, the sky turning bruised and sullen. A fire crackles somewhere behind you. There's food. Maybe. Maybe not. But you'll get up soon. You'll eat. You'll laugh. You'll sleep. Because today, you didn't die in a medieval battle, and honestly, that's enough. You wake with a jolt not from nightmares, though they had potential, but from the less poetic sensation of a beetle crawling across your cheek. You swipe it off, mutter an apology to the gods of cleanliness, and sit up slowly, muscles creaking like poorly oiled hinges. Around you, dawn breaks pale and cold, brushing the remnants of the battlefield with an almost apologetic light. The fires have gone out. Some soldiers still sleep, curled like discarded tunics in the grass. Others stir groggily, groaning as they stretch. Or, worse, discovering that certain limbs no longer stretch at all. You rub your eyes and blink at the strange calm. It's like waking up on a film, set the day after the apocalypse, a surreal stillness over yesterday's chaos. Your stomach growls. Loudly. You reach into your satchel and find a piece of hard bread, cracked in half and slightly damp. You eat it anyway. Hunger doesn't wait for luxury. Nearby, someone passes around a pot of something that might once have been soup. The smell is questionable, but everyone leans in like it's ambrosia. One man sips and winces. Still better than the cook's lentils. He mutters. Everyone nods solemnly. This is the part of battle. No one paints soldiers scratching at flea bites, comparing bruise, and trying to figure out whose boot that is in the bushes. There's less glory in washing dried blood off your armor with yesterday's rainwater. Still, it's necessary, and no one's rushing. Not because they're lazy, because they're sore in places they didn't know could be sore. You find a stream trickling nearby, cold enough to jolt your fingers awake. You splash your face, the chill biting pleasantly, washing away sweat, grime, and most of your dignity. There's a patch of clover growing along the edge. You pick one, not four-leaved, but it'll do. You tuck it into your belt, because superstition is free, and optimism is hard to come by. Quirky tidbit: some medieval warriors wore charms stitched into their underclothes, tiny saints, lockets of hair, or, in rare cases, bits of mummified cats. You haven't gone that far, but you do have a ribbon from a tavern girl back home, now stained with battle and a bit of soup. Someone walks by, limping, dragging a sword along the ground. Still, think you'll be back. By Tuesday, they joke to no one in particular. Another man snorts and replies, only if Tuesday's been cancelled for the next month. Morale, in short, is low but alive. You gather with others in a loose circle near a smoking fire pit. There's a debrief happening, if you can call it that. A knight with a cracked helm is explaining what happened in the most vague way possible. Something about flanking, something about morale, something about a goat, which might be a metaphor or might not. Nobody asks questions. Everyone's too tired for clarification. Historians still argue whether medieval commanders actually gave post-battle briefings or if soldiers just figured things out over soup and speculation. Judging by this morning's summary, we won. Kind of. Now, March. You're voting firmly for the latter. You shoulder your gear with an audible oof. The straps dig into new bruises. Your boots squelch ominously. You've cleaned off the worst of the grime. But you still smell like history's forgotten armpit. A fellow soldier passes you a scrap of cloth soaked in something herbal. You wipe your face with it and immediately regret it, whatever the herb is. It burns like self-reflection. As the column begins to form up again, the world narrows to movement and ritual. Check your gear. Tighten the straps. Avoid eye contact with anyone who looks like they might vomit or cry, or both. You fall into step. The path ahead is rutted, lined with broken branches and stray bits of discarded equipment. Crows squabble in the trees. One soldier swears they're counting corpses and taking notes. No one argues. Ahead lies another town, or maybe just another field, a place to regroup. Or maybe not. Orders are vague, delivered via hoarse messengers who look like they haven't slept since the plague was fashionable. But you march. Because marching is what you do. Quirky superstition. Some units believe that if the first man to trip after battle didn't swear, the next skirmish would go well. This morning, one guy tripped, landed face first in a puddle, and said, "Oh bother." Everyone applauded. You feel safer already. The air is warming. Slightly. The fog is lifting. There's birdsong again, thin and unimpressed, but present. You spot a squirrel and are momentarily jealous of its uncomplicated life. As you walk, you glance back over your shoulder. The field is behind you now. Quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows loud, terrible things. You won't miss it, but it will follow you, tucked somewhere behind your ribs, like a bruise you keep forgetting about. You adjust your grip on your sword. You shift your shield, and you keep walking, because that's what happens after battle. You survive. You rest. You get up, and you go to the next one. The march resumes. It's not glamorous. It's not even organized. It's a long line of hobbling, foot dragging, slightly singed soldiers trudging across terrain that looks like it's just as tired as you are. You've seen gravel with more personality than the road ahead. It dips. It puddles. It mocks your arches with every uneven step. But you go, your armor creaks. Your breath fogs in the early chill. You spot a man trying to bandage his foot while walking, which mostly just results in him swearing rhythmically with each hop. Another clutches a chicken. No one asks where he got it. You hope it's emotional support poultry. You pass a dead tree. Someone's carved with crude initials and what may be a rude drawing of a knight. A fellow soldier mutters, "That tree's seen some things." You nod solemnly, as if it's a veteran. In some ways, it probably is. No one sings. Not this time. Everyone's too sore, too blistered, too aware that every cheerful note would bounce off the gray sky like a bad omen. The only sounds are the steady clomp of boots, the occasional cough, and one guy muttering about never trusting stew again. Historians still argue whether medieval troops marched in perfect formations or looser, more chaotic clusters. You can confidently report, this is less formation and more casual zombie parade. The captain rides alongside the column, his armor polished just enough to reflect his own delusion. He shouts things like, "Steady," and "Pace yourselves," from horseback, which is kind of like yelling "hydrate" while sipping wine in a bath. You fantasize briefly about switching places, then your calf cramps and the fantasy dies an undignified death. You stop midday by a shallow creek. You don't sit down, you collapse. Dramatically, like a bored actor in an amateur play. The grass is patchy. The water tastes of frogs and forgotten rain. But it's cold and you drink anyway. Some soldiers take off boots to assess the damage. One reveals a blister so spectacular it earns gasps, and one slow clap, lunch, if you can call it that, is a strip of jerky and half a turnip. You chew slowly, staring at it like it betrayed your trust. Still, calories are calories, and your stomach doesn't care about betrayal. A man nearby offers to trade his onion for your jerky. You decline, even in war. Some lines must not be crossed. Quirky tidbit in some medieval armies. Soldier carried mascot dogs, pigs, even monkeys to boost morale. Your group has a one-eyed cat named Fergus, who may or may not be responsible for 3 battlefield disappearances. He sits now on a cart, licking his paw with aristocratic disapproval. The captain gives another speech. Something about honor. Something about duty. Something about marching orders that involve making haste to a place none of you can pronounce. Everyone nods politely and resumes walking as slowly as physically possible. You pass through a village, barely more than 6 huts and a goat. The locals stare like you're part of a circus no one asked for. One old woman throws a crust of bread toward the group. It's intercepted mid-air by a raven. The raven is now unofficially the best fed among you. Children wave. A few soldiers wave back. One trips over a turnip cart and earns an unceremonious spattering of cabbage to the chest. The children cheer. By late afternoon, the clouds thicken. The sun, barely committed to showing up in the first place, disappears altogether. The path climbs slowly upward now, just enough to annoy you without offering a decent view as compensation. You breathe heavier. Your boots squelch again. You are 85% mud at this point. Somewhere behind you, a man breaks into a fit of coughing, so intense it scares 2 horses and a monk. You press onward. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers were paid regularly or just occasionally remembered by the payroll officer. You haven't seen coin in weeks. But you did get half a loaf of rye and a good work from a knight who smelled like pickled onions. So, that's something. Evening creeps in. Someone starts singing a lullaby low, tuneless. The kind meant more for comforting yourself than anyone else. The melody floats over the heads of the weary, bouncing softly off helmets and half-shut eyes. Then, you reach a wide clearing. Trees ring the edge like grumpy guards. The word goes out, this is tonight's camp. There is no cheer, just the sound of people letting gravity win. You drop your pack. Your shoulders sigh with relief. You sit on a tree stump that may or may not be a communal latrine. And, frankly, you're too tired to care. A fire is lit. Not for warmth, just for boiling something vaguely edible. A stew of roots, leaves, and mysterious chunks appears. You taste it. You immediately wish you hadn't. Still, it's warm. And you're still breathing. You stretch out near the fire, watching the sparks drift upward like tiny souls escaping to a better place. The man beside you snores. The chicken is roosting on someone's helmet. Fergus, the cat, is curled on a discarded saddlebag, dreaming of conquest. The stars begin to show, and for now, you rest. Night wraps around you like an old wool blanket, scratchy, slightly damp, but comforting in its own way. You lie on your back, staring up at the stars peeking through the canopy of skeletal tree limbs. They're pinpricks of light in an otherwise very medieval sky, one that's seen far too much today and still offers no real answers. Your bed is a mix of moss, twigs, and aching regret. You shift, trying to avoid a rock that seems personally committed to lodging itself in your spine. No luck. You sigh. It's going to be that kind of night. All around you, the sounds of camp drift like soft background static. The low murmur of voices, the crackling of damp wood in the fire, the occasional fart that no one comments on out of mutual understanding. A dog barks once in the distance, then silence. You're not sleeping. Though, not yet, because something's gnawing at your nerves, and it's not just the suspicious stew or the blister forming its own democracy in your left boot. It's the creeping realization that you don't know where the enemy is, or where your commander is, or, frankly, where you are. You roll onto your side. The man next to you is muttering in his sleep. Something about geese. Too many geese. You choose not to ask. Historians still argue whether medieval armies ever truly knew what was happening on the battlefield, or if most of it was a chaotic game of follow. Whoever looks the least confused, judging by today's events and tonight's hushed conversations, you're leaning toward the latter. Orders are vague. Maps are scarcer than clean socks. And nobody really knows if you won today or just got less stabbed than usual. Quirky fact: some medieval commanders believed dreams could predict the outcome of battle. Soldiers were even told to report their dreams in the morning. You hope yours doesn't involve poultry. You sit up, rubbing your eyes. You need answers, or at least a direction. A vague one will do. You wander toward the center of camp, where a few torches flicker feebly. There's a cluster of officers hunched over what appears to be a very smudged map. They're pointing, whispering, and occasionally stabbing the parchment with fingers like they're blaming it for their problems. One of them glances up, says you, and waves you off with a go rest gesture, which in this context probably means you're too low ranked to be helpful. And also we have no idea what we're doing. You retreat, but not far. You settle near a fire and listen. The talk is hushed but grim. One flank broke and wasn't supposed to. Reinforcements never arrived. The town up the hill may or may not still be held. And worst of all, nobody knows where the enemy's cavalry went. That part gets repeated. A lot. You glance toward the dark horizon. The idea that 100 horses might be silently lurking out there makes your skin itch. But there's nothing to be done. You can't guard against ghosts. So, you lie back down, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders. Sleep, when it comes, is uneasy, broken into shards of dreams and half-waking moments. You hear distant footsteps, probably a patrol. You hear a baby crying, "Wait." No, it's just Fergus the cat, hacking up something dreadful near the firewood. Then morning, sort of. It's gray, cold, damp. You wake to the sound of shouting. Not panic. Not attack, but that clipped, annoyed tone of someone trying to organize people who have the collective motivation of damp toast. You get up. Slowly. Your joints pop like cheap fireworks. Your back feels like someone beat it with a bread paddle. You're developing a theory that your armor has fused to your spine. Still. You move. Breakfast is non-existent. You chew the last of your hard bread while someone hands out orders that no one really hears. Something about regrouping. Something about the road east. Something about not stepping on the bishop's wine crate again. You sling your pack over your shoulder, only to realize someone's replaced your water skin with a pouch of nope. Never mind. That's your laundry. You sigh and repack. The camp begins to move. Slowly. Like molasses, made of humans and iron. You join the column again. This time, the road leads through a narrow valley, flanked by hills that look suspiciously like ambush territory. You try not to look too closely at the rocks. They're probably just rocks. Probably, as you march, the fog settles lower. Voices get keener. The world narrows to footfalls and breath, and the clank of weapons on hips. It's oddly peaceful, if you ignore the constant threat of death. Quirky superstition time. Some soldiers carried feathers in their helmets not for decoration, but to ward off spirits. Yours is just straw, and it itches. But it's the thought that counts. Then something strange. A rider appears. Alone. Approaching from the far side of the ridge. No banners. No trumpet. Just a slow, deliberate pace that instantly makes every soldier within earshot tense, like a poorly tuned lute string. He stops ahead of the column. Says nothing. Your captain rides forward. There's an exchange too quiet to hear. Then a gesture. The captain turns back. We're changing course. He calls, "New orders. Move. West." Everyone groans. You just blink. Because you realize what's happening. Nobody really knows where you're going. You're wandering, bruised and battered, toward the next, maybe battle, with only partial directions, untrustworthy scouts, and one chicken who might be your most reliable informant. You sigh. And you walk, because that's what soldiers do. The westward path isn't really a path so much as a damp suggestion. You find yourself marching through thigh-high grass, tripping over hidden roots, and seriously re-evaluating your life choices. If the enemy doesn't kill you, the uneven terrain will, somewhere behind you. Someone mutters that this whole detour feels like a prank pulled by an overambitious squire. You agree, but keep it to yourself because your breath is currently being used for survival. The fog clings to your legs like a needy ghost. Visibility is laughable if you squint. You can just about make out the shape of the soldier ahead of you, which may or may not actually be a shrub. You make a mental note to stop following anything with fewer than 2 legs. The company lurches forward like a sleep-deprived caterpillar. There's no singing this time, only groaning, sniffling, and the slosh of your boots, which are officially more swamp than leather. Your socks have become abstract sculptures of discomfort. Historians still argue whether medieval armies really had coordinated marches or just vaguely agreed to head in the same direction and hoped for the best. Today feels like a strong case for the latter. You haven't seen a real road in hours. The last village marked on your map is either imaginary or recently devoured by goats. By midday, the fog lifts, revealing a field that looks promising. There's a ruined watchtower to the left, a small stream cutting through the middle, and a suspiciously large number of birds circling overhead like they're already placing bets. You stop. The column fans out into a sort of organized loaf wide, lumpy, and a little burnt at the edges. The officers ride ahead to scout. Everyone else sits, stretches, and removes boots with groans, so theatrical they deserve their own choir. You eat a few nuts from a pouch you forgot you had. One of them crunches suspiciously, and you decide not to investigate further. Your friend beside you pulls out a hunk of cheese that smells like it once insulted someone's ancestors. He offers you a bite. You decline with dignity. Quirky fact: some medieval fighters carried onions not just for eating, but for rubbing on wounds. Apparently, it was believed to draw out infection. You wonder if that's why someone in your unit always smells like soup. You take a walk to stretch your legs. There's a cluster of younger recruits comparing scars and blisters. One of them proudly reveals a bruised elbow shaped vaguely like a chicken. Battle mark. He claims. You don't have the heart to correct him. Someone else is carving a tiny figure out of wood, a crude knight with wobbly legs. For luck, he says. You nod and wonder if it's weird that you named your sword, but not your horse. Or maybe it's the other way around. Hard to say. You're tired. Then the scouts return. There's good news and bad news. The good, no immediate enemy presence. The bad, you're not where you're supposed to be. Again, a debate starts. Quiet. At first, then louder. Officers argue over terrain, compass directions, and something about the cursed stream that wasn't on the map. Eventually, someone gestures vaguely west again and says, "We'll camp and adjust at first light." Everyone nods like that makes sense. It doesn't. You set up camp on the edge of the stream. It's soggy but not fatal, which, in context, is a win. You help gather kindling, accidentally disturb a frog colony, and end up with mud in your ear. Again, fire is coaxed from damp wood, mostly through swearing and sheer emotional manipulation. Someone adds a handful of nettles to a pot and calls it dinner. You sip it. It's like being gently assaulted by spinach. As dusk falls, the mood is subdued, but weirdly calm. The not knowing has become normal. You've stopped needing a clear plan. Survival is your only bullet point now. You sit by the fire, warming your hands. A few soldiers tell stories, some real, some obviously made up. One involves a duel between a bishop and a baker over a misplaced sausage. You laugh too hard and nearly spill your nettle soup. Nearby, a soldier carefully removes his armor, revealing a patchwork of bruises and bandages. He sighs like an old book being closed. "I miss my goat," he murmurs. You nod solemnly. You lie down. Cloak wrapped tight. Helmet resting beside you like a weird metal pillow. The stars are clearer now. The fog burned off by evening chill. Crickets chirp in lazy rhythm. The fire crackles. Somewhere, a lute is being plucked badly. You close your eyes. Dreams come quickly muddy. Nonsensical flashes of marching, fighting, cheese, and that one squire who always shows up with the wrong banner. You dream of warm baths and soft beds and knowing where you are. But mostly, if you dream of tomorrow not being worse than today, that's as much as you dare ask for now. You wake to shouting, not panicked, shouting just the usual kind, tinged with frustration and sleep deprivation. Like a rooster that also pays taxes. You sit up slowly, peeling your damp cloak off like a bandage from a bad decision. Your back protests. Your legs file complaint. Your stomach mutters about labor rights. Another day in paradise. Around you, the camp stirs in its familiar, disorganized ritual. Some men are already half-armored. Others haven't quite figured out where their boots went. You see, one soldier trying to polish a dent out of his breastplate using a rock and sheer optimism. Your gear is cold and clammy, like it's been studying your fears all night. You put it on anyway. The chainmail gives a little sigh as it settles over your shoulders. You imagine it, whispering, "Here we go again." In a voice like rust and resignation, breakfast is a handful of barley and something that might be dried apple. Or a very unfortunate beetle. You eat it without asking. Then the horn sounds. Form up. You shuffle into line with the others. Weapons at your side. Your mind still trying to fully load into the present moment. The captain rides past, calling out orders that no one hears but everyone obeys. West again. Or northwest. Or possibly follow that suspicious cloud. The march begins. It's not far before the landscape changes, trees thinning. The road widening slightly. You spot a trail of boot prints, not your own. And wagon ruts, just deep enough to say someone else passed through here. Recently, the pace quickens. You feel it in the air tension that crackles like kindling before the flame. The kind of stillness that only exists before something loud happens. You tighten your grip on your weapon. You glance to your left, then your right, and then you see them. Across the field, emerging from the mist like a grumpy apparition. Another army. Not a horde. Not a chaotic mob. No, this is methodical. Flags raised. Formations tight. Spears glinting in the early light. The enemy, quirky battlefield note. Medieval soldiers were often trained to identify enemies by banners or uniform colors, which worked fine until everyone ran out of dye or forgot which heraldry belonged to whom. You squint. Their flag might be a falcon, or a ferret, or a spoon. Historians still argue whether most medieval battles began with formal challenges or if that was mostly theatrical nonsense. Today, There's no trumpet blast. No shouted insult. Just a long pause. A beat. And then motion. Not full-on charging. Just shifting. Both sides reshuffling. Calculating. Trying to look scarier than they feel. You hear whispered commands. The soft hiss of blades being drawn. The clink of nervous armor. Then, without ceremony, without signal, it begins. The arrows come first, from somewhere unseen. A volley rises into the sky like a flock of murderous geese. You duck instinctively, raising your shield. Around you, the sound is chaos and wood splitting, and one guy yelling, "Again already." You feel the thunk of one arrow catch the top of your shield. Another lands in the dirt beside you. A third grazes the air by your helmet. Close enough to make your ears file a complaint. You run. Not a way forward. A charge. Your boots slip in grass wet with dew and dread. You grip your weapon. Your heart thudding in rhythm with your breath. Ahead of you, the line moves. The enemy looms larger now. Less like shadows. More like people. Scarred. Armored. Confused people. Just like you, the crash happens fast. You meet their line like a wave meets a cliff sudden. Loud. And extremely bad for everyone involved. Shields slam. Blood is scrape. Somewhere. Someone screams something unintelligible and probably motivational. You swing. You miss. You swing again. You connect. You don't know what you hit. Only that your arms jolt and your hands ache. The world becomes a blur of motion and sound. You duck. You stumble. You recover. You swing again. A soldier to your right trips. You grab him by the collar and haul him back up. He nods. You both pretend it didn't happen. Quirky medieval belief. Some soldiers tied ribbons around their arms or legs, believing it would keep limbs from being severed. You wonder if that works for emotional limbs too. Time stretches, strangely. Minutes feel like hours. You lose your sense of direction. The field is a mess of boots, banners, and body odor. You spot a fallen standard. You grab it and wave it until someone else takes over. And then, like someone unplugged the sky, it ends. Not entirely. Just slows. The enemy falters. Their line bends. Breaks. Runs. Yours does not. You stand panting in a field that looks like it lost a food fight with a blacksmith. Around you, men collapse, kneel, or simply sit in the mud and stare into the distance like it owes them an explanation. You don't cheer. No one does. Because no one's sure what happened. Victory. Maybe, but mostly, it just feels like surviving. You breathe in, the air sharp with sweat and iron, and you whisper the only words that make sense. Still here. You stay standing longer than you should, not out of pride, definitely not that, but because if you sit down now, you're pretty sure gravity will keep you forever. Your knees make quiet threats every time you shift your weight. Your shoulders are stiff. Your hands shake. And your sword feels like it's gained emotional weight. The field is still, not peaceful, though more like when a tavern brawl ends, because everyone's too tired to keep going. You move slowly, scanning for familiar faces. Most of the soldiers are just slumped over where they stopped, like medieval scarecrows that gave up mid-season. You spot Elaine, the guy with the badly drawn dragon tattoo lying on his back, shield over his chest, chewing a blade of grass like he just finished gardening. Instead of deflecting death with his left arm, he gives you a lazy thumbs up. You return it, mostly with your eyebrows. Others didn't make it. You don't dwell. You just note. A shield here. A snapped spear there. A helmet with no head beneath it. You step over a broken standard that once meant something, probably still does to someone, and keep moving. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers were given any kind of debriefing after battle, or were simply expected to figure it out. Judging by what's happening now, you'd bet on the latter. There's no roll call. No triumphant speech. Just the slow rustle of exhausted men trying to remember how legs work. You reach a slight rise in the terrain and take in the scene. It's not cinematic. There are no sweeping trumpets, just mud, breath, and an occasional pigeon who seems far too smug. You hear someone ask if the battle is over. No one answers. But the absence of arrows, the lack of screaming, and the general inertia of the survivors seem to suggest, maybe, for now, quirky but true, some armies lit fires or rang bells after victory. Not to celebrate, but to let wandering soldiers know where to regroup. Today, the signal is simpler. Someone opens a barrel of water and mutters, "Free refills," like it's a joke. It kind of is. You drink. Not from that barrel, it's surrounded by men, jostling like it's a tavern on payday, but from a nearby stream. The water tastes like leaves and uncertainty. But it's cold. And you're alive. So, it feels like victory. You kneel by the bank, splashing your face, staring at your reflection. You look like a scarecrow that's been used as a training dummy. Then, sat on by a mule. Still, your eyes are open. That counts for something. A rustle behind you. You turn to see two soldiers gently lifting a wounded comrade. He's pale but conscious, muttering something about how he knew he should have become a miller. They half carry, half drag him toward the makeshift infirmary zone, a circle of cloaks, herbs, and one grim-faced monk who clearly regrets his vow of service. You go to help, not because you were ordered, just because it's something to do. Your hands are steadier when they're occupied. You hold bandages. You fetch water. You listen as the monk mutters about missing tourniquets and how he used to make a mean onion soup before all this started. Nearby, someone starts singing again. Not loud, not bold, just soft and tuneless. Like a lullaby, half remembered from a childhood that ended 3 days into conscription. You hum along without knowing the words. Time passes in fits and starts. Someone gathers the dead. Someone writes names on scraps of parchment, on bits of shield, in the dirt. You recognize one or two, but mostly they're just names now, floating through memory like leaves on water. Then, as the sun starts to fall, word spreads. Orders. Your captain calls for a regrouping. He doesn't shout, just walks through camp, telling clusters of soldiers, "We're moving before dusk." You blink. Moving. You've just stopped. But then you hear the reason. Another force was spotted on the horizon. Maybe an ally. Maybe not. The scouts aren't sure. Nobody wants to find out while sleeping. You nod. Of course. Of course you're moving again. You gather your gear. Your limbs groan in protest. Your fingers struggle with buckles that used to cooperate. But you manage. The column reforms. Smaller now. Quieter. And it moves. The march is slow. Almost funereal. Not out of sorrow, but out of sheer exhaustion. You walk not because you're ready, but because stopping means something worse might catch up. The battlefield disappears behind you, swallowed by distance and twilight. Just another stretch of land now, marked only by a few abandoned spears and the quiet hum of memory. Ahead lies more forest, more hills, more uncertainty, and still, you walk. Because tomorrow might be the same, or worse. But for now, you're still upright, still breathing, still part of the march, and in this strange, aching, muddy life, that's enough. The sun slides lower behind the hills as you keep moving, casting long, spindly shadows that make every bush look like it's judging your gait. The march has a ghostly rhythm now, no songs. Not grumbling, just the steady, squelching shuffle of boots through wet earth. It's less an army than a string of stubborn souls, tethered together by shared trauma and the faint hope of something better up ahead. Spoiler, it's probably not better. You've lost track of time. Could be an hour since you left the field. Could be 3. All you know is that your legs hurt in places that shouldn't technically exist. And you're pretty sure your toenails have filed for divorce. Eventually, the column slows. Not because of orders there haven't been any clear ones for a while, but because the land opens up and nobody's quite sure what to do next. You stumble out into a clearing that smells aggressively of damp moss and horse sweat. There's an old stone wall here, crumbling and half swallowed by ivy. Possibly the remnants of a chapel or a house. Or maybe just a medieval disappointment with architectural ambitions. The officers decide this will do for the night. Probably because nobody has the energy to argue. The camp begins to take shape with the resigned enthusiasm of people assembling furniture without instructions. You drop your gear and look around. This place feels older, not ancient, just tired. The kind of space where even the ghosts don't bother showing up anymore. There's a fire pit already here, half filled with charred bones and what might be a melted pewter spoon. You find that comforting. Somehow, as the fires light up one by one, you feel your body sink into the familiar rhythm of recovery. You set your bedroll near a low tree, using your helmet as a pillow again, because back support is for noblemen and dreams. Quirky fact. Some soldiers carried tiny bone charms for protection blessed by priests, monks, or that one guy who claimed he could talk to pigeons. You've got a coin tucked into your boot that someone told you once belonged to a saint. It probably didn't, but you rub it anyway, just in case. Historians still argue whether battlefield recovery was organized or just a collective mess. Based on the current vibe, it's leaning toward mess. Someone's boiling socks in a cooking pot. Someone else is trying to cook a pigeon that may have been dead before the battle. A third guy is talking to a log like it owes him money. You stretch out near the fire and let the heat seep into your bones. Every muscle is tight. Every joint clicks like a haunted metronome. You catch yourself, dozing off. But a sharp laugh jolts you awake. Someone's telling the story of a knight who ran into a tree mid-charge and claimed the tree insulted him. That sets off a string of tales. One man swears his sword bent around an enemy like a horseshoe. Another claims he saw a man throw a helmet like a discus and knock someone out cold. You offer up the pigeon you're currently eating. It tastes like regret and very faint time. Later, you join the group sharpening weapons. Not that you expect to use yours again so soon, but it gives your hands something to do. Plus, the rhythmic scrape of whetstone against steel has a kind of lullaby quality. Assuming your lullabies involved potential violence, as you work, a soldier named Tobin plops down beside you. He's missing half an eyebrow and smells like someone tried to ferment cabbage using only sweat. He offers you a flask. You sip. It burns. Your soul briefly attempts to exit your body through your ears. You hand it back and nod respectfully. Tobin leans in. Voice low. Heard the captain say we're marching at dawn. Toward a fort. Someplace called Black Hollow. You groan internally. Marching again. At this point, your boots are less footwear and more damp prayers. Still, the night isn't all bad. Someone breaks out a lute. It's missing 2 strings, and the player only knows half a melody. But nobody minds. The sound is scratchy, off-key, and oddly beautiful. You close your eyes and let it fill the spaces between your thoughts. Then it's quiet again. You lie back and stare at the stars. They're clearer now, less interrupted by fog or firelight. You trace the shapes your mother once told you: the plow, the serpent, the kettle that never boils. You think of home, of soft blankets, warm soup, a bed that doesn't smell like 10 kinds of sadness. You imagine the road ahead. Black Hollow, another place you've never heard of but will likely remember forever, especially if you survive it. You wonder how many more marches lie between you and the end of this war, if there even is an end. And then, despite the ache, despite the cold, despite the soft snores and distant coughs and the deeply troubling pigeon dinner, you smile, because you're still here. Still breathing, still stubborn enough to see tomorrow. The next morning, you are awoken not by a bugle or the rising sun, but by a goat standing directly on your foot. You stare at it. It stares back. Neither of you moves. Eventually, it bleats and trots away, like it's late for a very important appointment. You sit up and examine your foot. It still exists, though barely. Your boots look like they've been personally insulted by 5 elements and 2 different types of fungus. Around you, the camp is already stirring. Men rubbing their eyes, repacking here, arguing about whose turn it was to guard the salt pouch. You hear someone grumble. Next time ID. I want it to be on a feather bed. Another adds, with pie. You agree with both sentiments. The captain strides into view, somehow looking as though he slept on silk sheets and not a damp root network like the rest of you. He points west. Black Hollow, he says. Nobody cheers, but everyone starts moving. You hoist your pack, which has now developed a mysterious rattle, possibly rocks, possibly teeth. You don't ask. The road ahead narrows into a trail that threads between hills. The sort of terrain where people either get ambushed or compose dramatic poetry. You vote for neither. The march is long and quiet, punctuated only by the sounds of boots on gravel, occasional coughs, and one guy trying to whistle a tune and forgetting halfway through. At one point, the trees thin out enough to reveal a sliver of ruins off to your left, crumbling towers, half sunk into the earth like they're trying to lie down and take a nap. You envy them. Quirky tidbit soldiers, sometimes looted old ruins for building materials, or just out of boredom. You pass the ruins without stopping, though one guy does snag a moss-covered brick. "For my sister," he says, as if she's a big fan of damp architectural souvenirs. Historians still argue whether common soldiers had any clue where they were headed, or if they simply followed orders and hoped the destination wasn't plague-related. In this case, the maps are vague, and morale is vaguer. But Black Hollow is real enough, at least according to the one guy who swears he saw it once. From a distance, possibly in a dream. The terrain flattens out, which seems like good news until your feet start to sink into the soft, marshy soil. Each step comes with a wet squelch and a silent prayer. One soldier loses a boot to the mud and walks the next mile, cursing softly in 3 languages. Finally, as the sun dips low, you see it? Black Hollow. It's not a fortress so much as a suggestion of one, a cluster of wooden palisades, a few stone buildings, and a tower leaning slightly to the left like it's thinking very hard about falling over. Smoke rises lazily from a few chimneys. And, somewhere, a dog barks with the confidence of a much larger animal. You shuffle into the outer yard, where a man in rusty armor squints at you from behind a gate. "Reinforcements?" he asks, as if he doesn't quite believe his own eyes. "Unfortunately," your captain replies. You're ushered inside. The fort smells like mildew and boiled meat. There are more goats. So many goats. One appears to be standing on a barrel for no reason other than personal branding. You drop your gear against the wall and sit fully intending to never move again. The quartermaster hands out rations, dried fish, stale bread, and what might once have been an onion. You eat with the resigned air of a professional sadness consumer. Later, as darkness falls, you're assigned a post on the wall. Your companion is a man named Gervais, who insists he once kissed a duchess and hasn't washed his face since. He tells you about his hometown, which features 17 sheep, 2 windmills, and one very angry librarian. You nod politely while keeping an eye on the horizon. The air is cooler here, clearer. You can smell pine trees and distant rain. The stars above feel closer, sharper like they're watching. You hear laughter from inside the fort, followed by a crashing sound and someone yelling. It was already broken. You don't want to know. Then quiet. Gervais falls asleep, mid-sentence, his head slumping forward like a wilted daisy. You keep watch, blinking against the darkness, counting the beats between breaths. Eventually, you lower yourself to a seated position. The wood of the palisade is rough and splintery, but you've slept in worse places like that, one night in the latrine-adjacent ditch. You pull your cloak tighter, rest your chin on your knees, and stare out across the field. Nothing stirs. No enemies. No monsters. Just wind, stars, and the occasional sleepy goat repositioning dramatically. You whisper to yourself, Black Hollow. It sounds like a warning, or a secret, or maybe just another stop on a road that never quite ends. Sleep is more of a suggestion than a fact at Black Hollow. You drift off for maybe an hour, chin tucked to your chest, then snap awake to the sound of creaking wood and distant muttering. It's not an attack, just Gervais snoring so loudly it echoes off the tower like he's trying to summon the dead with nasal vibrations. You jab him lightly with a stick. He mutters something about a pie contest and rolls over. The rest of the night passes in fragments. One moment you're counting stars. The next, you're dreaming of bread that doesn't taste like laundry. Before long, the sky begins to pale, bleeding from black to indigo to the dusty peach of a new day. You stand, stretch, and immediately regret both decisions. The fort wakes reluctantly. A few of the local garrison shuffle past you with haunted expressions and impressively chaotic bedhead. One nods and offers a cracked mug of something vaguely tea-like. You sip. It's warm, bitter, and somehow tastes like regret and moss. Still, it's the closest thing to luxury you've had since this whole ordeal started. You're assigned to help repair the palisade. It's less carpentry and more. Hold this while someone else hits it. You pass tools, hammer wedges into place, and try not to think about the fact that the tower leans a little more each time you glance at it. Quirky fort fact. Some soldiers believed placing iron nails in wooden walls warded off ghosts. You see a guy tap a nail into the gate while whistling nervously. Nobody questions it. Historians still argue whether fort garrisons maintained strict routines or just winged it based on who was sober enough to organize things. Black Hollow leans decisively toward winging it. The morning meeting consists of the captain pointing vaguely at a map and saying, "Don't de." Solid advice. You're split into squads. Some patrol the perimeter. Others restock arrows or clean weapons. You're sent to assist the cook, a wiry woman with arms like braided rope and an expression that says she once stared down a plague and won. She hands you a sack of onions and a knife, so blunt it might as well be a spoon. You peel. Slowly, carefully, occasionally crying not just from the onions. The food here is marginally better than field rations. Marginally. Lunch is a stew containing beans, turnips, and what might be rabbit or shoe. It doesn't matter. You eat it gratefully, while perched on an upturned bucket beside two grizzled archers who spend 20 minutes arguing over the best type of mud to sleep in. That afternoon, Amisnia arrives, dusty, wide-eyed, and riding a horse that looks like it personally resents you. He hands a scroll to the captain, who reads it, frowns, then waves you all over. Bandits, he says, in the hills, harassing our supply line. There's a groan from the crowd. Not because of the danger, because it means marching. Again. By late afternoon, you're back on the road. Your boots squish with every step. Your gear rattles. Your legs offer a strongly worded complaint to the management of your body, but the path is at least shaded by trees, which means fewer sunburns and fewer crows, giving you judgmental looks from above. As you climb a ridge, you pass a cluster of stone markers, simple, lichen-covered stumps, possibly graves. possibly territorial warnings. One is shaped like a crooked T. Another looks almost like a face. You don't linger. The hills are quiet. Too quiet. You hate how cliché that sounds even in your own head. But it's true. No birds. No wind. Just the crunch of gravel and the soft hiss of fabric brushing fabric. You grip your weapon a little tighter and glance toward the captain, who's doing his best impression of calm. Suddenly movement, just a flicker. A blur between trees. The line halts. You drop into a crouch. Heart thudding. The air tastes electric. Then a whistle, not from your group. From the hill, then the arrows come. Not a full volley, just a few. Enough to let you know that someone up there doesn't want to chat. You raise your shield and duck behind a rock. Around you, soldiers scatter into cover like startled pigeons. The captain yells for a flank. A squad peels off and disappears into the trees. You wait. You listen. Then the cry goes up. Clear. You scramble forward with the rest, navigating sharp rocks, loose branches, and one very angry squirrel. At the top of the ridge, you find the remains of a crude camp, burned out fire pits, scattered refuse, and one torn banner with an emblem you don't recognize. A local band, maybe. Or deserters. Or both. Quirky detail. Some bandits used animal bones to decorate their camps, believing it scared off soldiers. You find a goat skull tied to a tree with blue twine. You nod respectfully. You return to Black Hollow by moonlight, tired, hungry, still intact. As you collapse into your spot by the wall, someone hands you a piece of hard bread and a tiny strip of cheese. It tastes like victory, mostly because you didn't have to cook it. You lean back, watch the stars, reclaim the sky, and feel the day drain from your bones. You're bruised, filthy, probably developing a rash that hasn't been medically discovered yet. But you're here, still standing. And for tonight. That's enough. You wake to the sound of screaming. But don't worry, it's the good kind. Not the we're under attack kind. But the someone found a bat in their boot kind. Apparently. It had made itself a cozy nest using hay, lint, and an abandoned sardine wrapper. The victim, a lanky lad named Jules, is now bat-free but emotionally ruined. Someone offers him a boiled root as consolation. He declines. It's another day at Black Hollow. You stretch, ache, and check for any new holes in your socks. Just the usual ones. The fort hums to life around you with the sluggish rhythm of people who never quite slept but are pretending they did. A chicken wanders through the courtyard like it owns the place. It probably does. Morning duties are assigned. You, somehow, end up hauling barrels. Why are there always barrels? Where do they come from? Is there a secret medieval barrel factory just churning them out while cackling in the distance? The contents vary. Sometimes water. Sometimes oats. Sometimes the dreaded pickled eel. Today it's pitch for torches. And the smell could knock over a bishop. As you work, you start overhearing the gossip. Not whispers of war or strategy. No. This is much juicier. Rumors. Tobin swears he saw the captain sneaking out of the tower last night, wearing a red cloak and carrying something shiny. Gervais claims the cook is actually the runaway daughter of a nobleman, hiding in plain sight. Another soldier insists he met a ghost in the latrines, and it complemented his aim. You love it, because even amid the muck and grime and occasional airborne rodents, the human brain refuses to be boring. And camp gossip. It's basically medieval Netflix. Quirky side note. Medieval soldiers often believed in talking armor, pieces of gear imbued with spirits or cursed personalities. One man in the garrison refuses to wear a particular helmet because it growls when cold. No one's tested it. But the helmet is, indeed, avoided, like spoiled cheese. Historians still argue whether soldiers truly believed these stories or just used them as ways to cope. Either way, they spread like wildfire and take on lives of their own. The bat boot incident, already retold 3 times, now involving a snake, a priest, and a chicken armed with a spoon. After barrel duty, you're posted on lookout. You climb the rickety tower, carefully avoiding the loose planks and questionable nails. From the top, the view is disappointing. Just endless forest. One lonely ridge, and a tiny path that disappears into trees like it has commitment issues. Still, the solitude is oddly comforting. You settle in beside a crow who regards you with mild contempt. You name him Edgar. He doesn't seem pleased. Time drips by. You snack on dried peas. Watch ants carry away crumbs with military precision, and count how many clouds resemble goats. The answer is disturbingly high. Eventually, you hear footsteps. Not from outside, from below. Then, voices raised. Tense, you lean down and catch snatches. A new message. Orders. Possibly false. No one's sure. Within an hour, the fort is buzzing. Officers meet in low huddles. The cook locks up the food stores, which means things might be serious. Even the goats are herded into one corner, just in case they turn out to be strategic assets. Honestly, after seeing what one did to a bucket yesterday, you wouldn't be surprised. You're called down. A squad is forming. Not a full deployment. More like a scout team. Light armor. Cat movement. Fast feet. You're picked probably because your boots are quieter than Gervais's, who sounds like someone shaking a bag of pans when he walks. Your destination. An old watch post on the edge of a ravine. Abandoned months ago. Supposedly haunted. Naturally. You pack light, a small ration punch. Your dagger? And your favorite lucky rock. Don't judge. It's got great emotional support energy. The path is narrow and tangled. Vine claw at your legs. Birds scatter at your approach. Somewhere in the distance, something howls. You decide it was just wind. Definitely wind. The post is still there, leaning slightly, roof half collapsed, but upright. You circle it carefully. No signs of life. No tracks. But inside you find a fire pit, warm ashes. Someone was here. Recently. You signal the others, and a quiet search begins. You find scraps of fabric, a torn map, and oddest of all, a small silver spoon engraved with a lion. Fancy. Probably looted. Maybe left behind in a hurry. You camp nearby, posting double watch shifts. The wind moans through the trees like a bored ghost auditioning for a dramatic role. You wrap your cloak tighter and pretend not to be spooked, because deep down, you know something's coming. But tonight, it's just wind, gossip, goats, and one very grumpy crow. And, honestly, that's enough excitement for one medieval lifetime. The morning fog is so thick it feels like someone smeared porridge across your eyeballs. You wake curled around your boots, which is unfortunate, because you were using them as a pillow and now your face smells like regret and damp leather. Across the tiny scout camp, someone is humming. Badly. Possibly on purpose. The old watchpost looms nearby, its wooden walls creaking in the breeze. You glance up at the sky, but it's mostly just cloud. A seagull flaps lazily overhead, clearly lost. Breakfast is hardtack and colder than you thought beans, shared in grumpy silence with your squad. Nobody says it, but you all feel it, that itchy, unpleasant sense that something's off. It's in the air, like static, or the feeling you get when you know you've forgotten something important but can't remember what. You're sent to scout further into the ravine. Great. The terrain shifts fast. One moment, dry scrub and rocky outcrops. The next, a boggy mess where every other step sucks at your foot like an enthusiastic leech. At one point, a frog jumps into your path and you nearly scream. It stares at you. You stare back. It wins. You spot a trail narrow, nearly invisible, fresh footprints. Not military boots. Softer, lighter, possibly bandits. Possibly scouts from another force. Possibly peasants with extremely weird travel routes. You signal the others and follow it carefully, one step at a time, each leaf crunching like a betrayal. Eventually, it leads to a cave. Of course it does, because if there's one thing worse than fighting in the open, it's fighting underground. Quirky, medieval battle belief caves were thought to be entrances to the underworld, literal hellmouths. Some soldiers carried herbs or crosses, just in case. You've got a twig. It smells like moss. You consider it blessed. Historians still argue whether medieval troops avoided caves out of superstition or practicality. This one has both problems. The entrance reeks of damp stone, rotting vegetation, and something less easily defined. You peer inside. No movement, but definitely signs of occupation: ashes, gnawed bones, a blanket that might once have been blue. You return to Black Hollow with the news. The captain listens, nods, frowns in the universal military language, for this is annoying but important. He says, "We'll clear it tomorrow." Then adds, "Get some rest." You try? You really do. But that night, the fort is louder than usual. Someone plays a flute, badly. Someone else is trying to juggle apples and drops one on your foot. A brawl breaks out between two men arguing over whether boiled cabbage is food or punishment. You fall asleep to the sound of a goat eating someone's map. Next morning, Operation Cave Adventure. You're part of the entry squad, which seems deeply unfair, considering your previous contribution was not dying. You gear up again, chainmail, torch, your trusty twig, and try not to look too haunted. The hike back is quieter than before. The forest seems more alert. You catch glints between trees, nothing definite. Just hints of movement, like shadows practicing their dance routines. At the cave, you light torches. The squad enters. The air inside is cool, stale, and full of echo. Every drip, every scuff of a boot sounds like thunder. You move slow, checking corners, scanning walls for signs of traps, ruins, or extremely territorial bats. Then a sound, scraping. Metal on stone. You hold your breath. Someone ahead hisses. Movement. You rush forward. Turns out rats. So many rats. They burst from a pile of sacks like furry nightmares, swarming past your boots. One tries to climb Tobin's leg. He screams and flails. You swat it off with the torch. It leaves behind a scent you will never emotionally recover from. Beyond the rat pile. More signs, abandoned gear. A torn putch. And a piece of jerky that somehow looks smug. You reach a larger chamber, clearly used as a base. Empty now. Whoever was here, they're long gone. You find another clue, a crude map scrawled in charcoal on the cave wall. Black Hollow, the ravine, several marked paths, and one ominous symbol, a cross over the fort. You return to the captain. He frowns. They're planning a raid. Nobody says it, but everyone feels it. The energy shifts. Suddenly, everything's sharp, focused. The rest of the day is spent reinforcing walls, checking weapons, preparing boiling oil or something vaguely oily and warm. Anyway, the cook yells at anyone who steps near her stew cauldron with a sword. A young archer writes a letter home with shaking hands and accidentally uses gravy as ink. You watch it all from the wall. Black Hollow might not be pretty. It might not be structurally sound. It might have more goats than strategy. But for now it's yours, and it's going to be defended. Even if it smells like pickled regret, and the walls creak like they're trying to file a complaint, the night settles over Black Hollow like a heavy, damp cloak smelling of smoke, vet wood, and a hint of burnt stew. The stars above twinkle faintly, half hidden behind clouds that look like they're made of crushed wool. You settle onto your cot, muscles aching and mind buzzing. With the day's strange mixture of fear and grim determination, the camp is quieter now, save for the occasional grunt, the flicker of torchlight, and the steady rustle of the goats roaming freely as if they own the place. They probably do. One is perched atop a barrel, watching the world with the superior gaze of a creature who's seen too much and cares too little. You pull your cloak tighter and try to find a comfortable position, which is more difficult than it sounds when you're still wearing your boots. The wood beneath you creaks ominously, like it's ready to collapse under the weight of a particularly soggy loaf of bread. Your thoughts drift back to the cave. The map, the symbol etched so carelessly on stone, the crossed-out fort, a warning, a promise, you're not sure. But the air in the camp has shifted, charged with the tension of unseen eyes, watching and waiting. Historians still argue whether the fear of raids was more psychological than actual. You're leaning toward both, especially when every twig snap feels like a siege horn. A soft whistle pierces the night. Not from your camp, but somewhere beyond the palisade. A signal, a warning. The camp stirs. Men grip weapons. Torches flare. The goats scatter with indignant bleats. You stand? Heart hammering. The captain barks, orders patrols to the perimeter. Archers to the walls. Scouts to the shadows. You find yourself gripping your sword tighter than usual. Every nerve alert. Minutus stretch. You stare into the darkness, searching for movement. The trees sway. The wind whispers secrets. A distant owl hoots. Somewhere, a dog barks. Then, silence. The tension breaks not with battle cries, but with laughter. Low, relieved, scattered. Someone tells a joke about a knight who forgot his sword and used a frying pan instead. The mood lightens. The goats return. Unimpressed. You chuckle softly. Muscles relaxing for the first time in hours. You sit back down by the fire. The warmth seeping into your bones. Around you, the camp slowly settles again. Stories start. Jokes fly. And the steady rhythm of life fragile. Stubborn. Unyielding returns. You lean back. Eyes half closed. The firelight flickering across your face. For all its horrors, all its mud and blood and fear, this strange, ragged life is yours, and you're still here. Still fighting, still dreaming of home. As your breathing slows, the last thought that crosses your mind is simple. Tomorrow, whatever it brings, you'll face it. Because that's what soldiers do.